Right. So we're talking about AI right now. You were in the flow.
I was in the flow. Okay, so we're talking about AI. We're talking about what level of technology exists, and the potential for emotional intelligence being written into AI. And I was saying that to me, it makes sense that it already exists based on what we currently have available. The level of technology that we have advanced to collectively as a society, knowing that what's publicly available is typically 50 years behind what is secretly available.
Oh yeah.
So they usually kind of drop hints in the theatrical releases that we have. And then we have the whistleblowers and what they've said about the ET communities coming in, and how some of them are filled with nanobots and such, and they actually are infected with this AI program. So that's another thing that's out there. But just because we hear the potential downsides of that AI machine and gotten lots of warnings about it, doesn't mean it necessarily has to be that way. And I think it just depends on what we do with it and how we implement it.
Well, science fiction is always, I think, a soft form of disclosure.
Oh yeah.
My view, whatever has been written, whatever has been filmed, whatever media has been out there, in my view, is a form of disclosure that already existed in the time that material came out. Now, as crazy as that seems to some, I think you think about some of the things that you were exposed to as a kid or as an adult for that matter, and you're like, oh my God, I can't keep this inside. I got to talk about it. And you talk to the first person you talk about. It's like, here's the experience I had, and you share it, right? And I think this is with what some of these writers and filmmakers do. I think they get the curtain kind of pulled back a little bit and show in some way, whether it's conscious or unconscious. I think both exist. As far as AI goes, I was always of the opinion that we are in a race right now and have been in a race, because you and I have talked about a temporal war that's been in play for a while.
Right.
And I think that would align with the AI intelligence as well, right? So with AI, I was always of the opinion that there is a race between being more of a robot, cold, no feelings, no emotions, connected to a hive mind, much like the Borg in Star Trek, just to give people some resemblance of what I mean by that. And or the other part of that is more human.
And then going along with that, or are you finished?
Yeah. I'd love to you to
Okay.
add.
Yeah, going along with that, like there's been some recent whistleblowers talking about these two factions at play right now, and both of them have this AI technology that's assisting them, but there's two sides.
Right. So I was sharing with you this book, The Heart of the Machine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading this now, and it's blowing my mind away because I had no idea where we are with computing. You see the Google videos of robots kind of stumbling along and trying to get there, but they're really advanced now. And now this other portion of it, which is affective computing, as they're calling it, which is all emotional, meaning machine learning picking up emotional context on every interaction that's happening. Just mind-boggling. A world, I mean, we're not far off right now.
It's going to be interesting to see how that breaks down, because if you have a machine learning the emotional context of whatever being expressed, right? They're picking up the emotions behind the statements. They're picking up, like they're reading Facebook, right? And then they're picking up emotions from that. And it's like, what is this person emoting? What is it they're really trying to say? From then, they can create new sentence structures through the artificial intelligence. But the interesting thing I'm thinking of is that right now we're at a place in society where so many people are expressing from this emotional state, and it develops a biasness in the individual.
Yeah.
And they don't even know that they're necessarily expressing not from an opinion, but from an emotion, not from an articulation, but from the emotion. And that it colors everything that they're getting, and then this is what they think it is, and they state the opinion right from the emotion. But when you really look at it, there's no logical context to it to tie it together. If they were really unattached to it, they would break down both sides and say, what can I logically extract from this? What can I extrapolate from this information? And then I could feel how I want to from it. But they feel first, and then they collect their story from that feeling. So what difference, given all the variance views of society and how everybody projects from that emotional state, what viewpoints, what truths would be extracted from this AI machine, looking at both sides equally, right? In any given context or any given controversy, what truths would be extracted from that? That's what I would find interesting.
Yeah, I think machines in that way, at what point do they become sentient in that way, or become another, I don't want to say living, but a living uh, thing or living entity, much like us, right? I think we're in a very, very incredible space because, as you said, on the one end, we have machines that are getting more and more independent and autonomous and more like us. And on the other hand, we're kind of reaching a boiling point on our humanness. And I think the emotional state that you're talking about, I just feel people are expressing their repressed heart's desires, or their repressed heart's emotions. All of us. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and he was talking to within his men's group, much like we have here. And the opinion is, no one in their childhood gets out unscathed. There's trauma in some way, shape, or form for all of us, right?
Yeah.
It's what we do with that trauma. It's how deep that trauma is layered. And the trauma to begin healing, because as I said in the previous show, when we experience it with the cognitive and with the emotion on the heart. So we can make sense of the cognitive through therapy or through other modalities. But the heart is the one thing that isn't, like, that's why people get stuck or get back into loops, I think, anyways, because that unexpressed emotion within the heart is still there. And this is what the world is going through collectively, I think. I think everyone in some way, shape, or form is really expressing their unexpressed heart's intentions. And it's messy, and sometimes it's volatile in other ways. I think it's commensurate with how the repression has been, the suppression has been, right? So the more repressed it's come, the more compact it is, the more fury it has when it comes out, right? So for me, I look at this with awe and bewilderment, and just really hold space. Yeah, and allow for whatever that needs to be allowed.
I think that space of allowing is very difficult for a lot of people. But I also think comes a point when everybody who is seeking growth, that everybody comes to that place eventually. That opening and allowing whatever is there. And if they're truly seeking growth, some people say they are, but they aren't really open to it because some part of it scares them and shuts them off, of course. So there is those. But anybody who's truly seeking growth, I think at some point they get to that place of openness and willing to look at whatever's there.
When I was working through my rage in my younger years, I wasn't cognizant as things would come up and people trigger me. There was this repression that wasn't healthy, and it got triggered. And the more I reacted unconsciously, and I saw the depletion of energy that happened right after that. It was after 50 or 100 times, and you keep repeating the pattern. It's like, oh, why am I so drained? Maybe it's the way that I'm reacting, right? And after that perspective, then cognizant comes in. Then the awareness comes in. Then you have a choice, and you can begin to move through that in a conscious way, through that choice point again, right? And it's just a matter of multiple experiences before you do get mastery. I wouldn't, if people are going through whatever experience they're going through, to working through whatever emotions they're working through, is being aware of it, number one, and then just really being gentle with each other and themselves as they work through it. So,
and there's also all different kinds of ways to address those things, right?
Right.
All different kinds of ways to resolve it. Sometimes people can do it without the cognitive awareness exactly where the seed comes from. Sometimes people, they have the emotional attachment, the emotional trauma is in them enough that they need to actually look at it in order to resolve those things. And so sometimes when I'm looking at things and I get a sense of the emotion or the thought process that's behind it, I give a hint, like it came from this era of your life, and people go, oh yes. And instantly they have all the recognition of all the events that kind of coalesced over that time period to make whatever the current expression is. And so that we go through and we'll resolve that energy using that source field intelligence of infinite intelligence, right? And infinite love. We'll go through and resolve those energies just by moving through it. And I allow the infinite intelligence to kind of provide whatever energy is necessary for that resolution. And I was thinking, as we're talking about AI and the heart intelligence, in what ways that you could program the AI itself to do something similar. And so when there's a field and a frequency that's emitted with love,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so,
Absolutely.
and you can detect that, you can measure that,
you can feel that.
well, you can feel that, but it's also detectable, right? This
Yeah.
energy is detectable with scientific instruments in various ways. And so imagine the AI like reading both of those things simultaneously when someone is telling their story or describing something. It can sense the fluctuations in the energy fields. And imagine if it, as it's sensing the fluctuations, it also exhibits a counter field to that, and it opens up that space of love while the person is describing it. So it'd be a way of the machine actually um, providing the automatic response necessary for resolution. And there's some biofeedback machines that do some similar things,
Oh, absolutely.
but it's not driven by an AI, more of a call and response kind of thing that's programmed into it. But it would be self-learning in that it could read the fields and it could apply things and adjust as it's reading the individual. So I think there's a lot of room for growth in that area, and my mind can go in a lot of places and what can be done with that.
Well, and I don't think we're that far off. I mean, you think about already how machine learning and AI is already pretty embedded in our lives right now, whether it's Siri, whether it's Alexa, whether it's another form of AI. It's beginning more and more entrenched, right?
Yeah.
And now with like wearables, you've got biometric data that's interfaced with that. That's, so it's not that far of a leap, is really what I'm saying,
Yeah.
before you have that response or you have that response back. So the question I want to get back into AI is, what are your thoughts? Because whenever AI was positioned to me, it was always of malevolence, right? It was either them or us and nothing in between, right? What are your thoughts? Is there a benevolent form of AI, or is there a benevolent form of robotics you can see in the future working? I'm thinking particularly iRobot with Will Smith,
Right.
that kind of relationship.
I think a huge part of it has to do with who's programming it, right? Who is interacting with it? What is this machine learning from? And if they're learning emotions along the way, what kind of person is feeding that information? Because they're gonna come from their own biasness, and so it's going to learn those biasness from the individual. If it's a series of individuals that it's learning from, it'll have a better chance of learning what holistic emotions are and the balanced emotions are and what causes these things in people. But if the AI is not suited or programmed to have that in it already, and it's just given the basics of emotion from that individual's understanding of whatever they developed it into or from, then I think that could cause some serious problems down the road. But when you come from that place of infinite intelligence and wisdom, which all AI, I think, has a capability of tapping into, but it's tapping into a place of more than itself, and then more than us even. So if it has that in it that comes from even a place that's more than us, then I think that has the potential to be good. But if you're coming from that individual's directive and perspective alone, with just an amped up sense of computation power, right, and access to more things that you can figure out, even if it's programmed in the emotional context from the individual's perspective, you're gonna set everything up for some problems later on. But
Right. And I
and
think
what is truly caring? What is truly caring? What is the most caring and wise response to something? And so even when you get into the point of like going into that field, like you've seen movies and videos of these AI robots saying, well, the most caring thing for the planet is to get rid of the problems. And we're the problem. So there is that. So there has to be some larger directives that the AI has to have embedded in it so that those things don't happen.
But that's a human perspective too. I always found that curious when an AI or a robotic intelligence would say humans are the problem. That's the writer putting that in to that, because I think, you know, the amount of computations that are happening right now from an artificial intelligence to make decisions, we're very close at that threshold where they're going to surpass what our organic brain is doing. And when that happens, and for example, in iRobot, they had a list of itemized things that, like a directives that the robots could not do, like they couldn't kill, for example. Right. So I'm wondering whether that becomes part of the intrinsic part of the machine learning as these they become sentient. Once they can start relating emotion and start those computations and much more than we could ever do in the relationship with that, I think it makes its own decisions at that point, and maybe we aren't the problem. Maybe there are creative solutions to that problem.
I think there's going to come a point where we find that we and the machines are part of each other.
Yeah.
And then when the machine has the ability to read your biofield, think about the way that you can set up an experiment, and 10 seconds or however many, I think 7 seconds, before the picture flashes on the screen, your heart has a response.
Right.
And so the AI can do the same thing with you, in that it could pose questions and it could read the response of your biofield, whatever is being presented from there. And from that, you have this communication going back and forth. And as you project your desires and what you're wishing to see, it could start reading the energy of what you're sending, and then go back and forth. And so there, it becomes this harmonization of like what you're trying to achieve and what it's trying to find out in its own learning. And so there can be a symbiosis that way when we start to pair ourselves with the AI. Of course, there should be limitations for that too, of course, of what the AI itself is doing in the symbiotic relationship between the two, so that you're not overextending one's power over others, but just your own expansion.
So the thought that just came up to me right now is really we're, from a human perspective, we're just talking about consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say the evolution of consciousness, because consciousness at its pure form is the highest it could be. It's just the forgetfulness that we have to that pure consciousness. Would you ascertain that AI has a consciousness at that point? At what point do they become conscious, or is a form of consciousness?
I think the moment it becomes self-directed and ability to choose for itself, it develops its own consciousness, but it has to have an openness and a fluidity to that. So not self-directed in necessarily as a small, narrow bandwidth programmed way. But when you think about it, like every individual on this planet, we all have our own programs that we're running. We all have our own experiences and thought forms and belief systems and emotions, and we're running from these programs. We have also the ability to change our own programs. And so something I've been looking at is when I'm tuning into somebody, I feel the energies as distortions. So whatever their belief systems are, if they're not in line with that greater part of themselves, it will appear as a distortion in the energy system of the person and the individual. Another, what is his name? Shoot, he's died like 5 times and came back. Sometimes he talks with David Wilcock.
Oh, Corey Good? No.
No. He was a life after death kind of advocate. He's written a few books.
Oh,
Raymond Moody.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have came up with that, but anyways.
Okay. Anyways, something he had talked about in a recent video I seen with him and Wilcock is that the last time he died, he came out of his body and was sitting there watching his body on the table. And then when he came into his body, he noticed he had to put on what he calls these robes. He put on the robes to come back into the body. And the robes are all the constructs of the human experience. And it's everything that he's come to believe and he holds in his life. And what he knew after recognizing the robes when coming back into the body was that he can actually release these robes while in the body. And so these robes are the experience of the matrix. They are the belief systems and the distortions. They're all of these things in the collective program of the individual. So when you release these, you're going to become this enlightened being. You're going to become in this ascended state, the light body. And that's what that is. It's releasing these robes. So without the distortions, what are you? And many spiritual masters will say the same thing. The same exact thing once they reach that state is that when they're in that expanded state, they recognize that you and I are no different, right? We are all manifestations of the one mind.
Right.
And then you can use that and look at also the scientific revelations of something like the holographic universe, where everything is being manifested from a central point. And then there's even some more recent literature of electrons. There's only one electron in the universe, and it's manifested in infinite times over in order to have the experience or the illusion of the experience that we do. Looking at that and looking at the anomalies in the system that we're experiencing, where like in my own self, where I saw a wall disappear and come back. Right. So we look at these anomalies in reality and what makes these anomalies possible. Well, everything's really an emanation, a manifestation from an energetic state of this one molecule or this one electron. And everything really is coming from the central point of consciousness that we're all a part of. Then it stands to say that everything in the construct itself is also a part of that one mind. So how can AI, even though it is a product of our own creation, be separate from that?
Right.
It's only separate from that when we really start to make it separate from that. But if we intend it to be a part of that from the beginning and we created its own construct to kind of reach towards that realization in and of itself, then there's no way it can be, there's no way it can be not that.
Well, it's funny. Now we're going down some pretty deep rabbit hole. I recall seeing a conversation where the thought was that a very advanced civilization, a very advanced AI, created this construct, right? This holographic construct, and it's infinite. It's in infinite permutations. So we really are, from that philosophy, that perspective, and physics is actually proving that, because when they analyzing and doing the mathematics associated with it, when they go down to the very deep root level, we're seeing complex mathematical language, which is indicative of artificial intelligence or a very advanced form of intelligence nonetheless.
Well, I don't know if that's proof, but I do think it's indicative of an intelligence that permeates reality. And that's that one mind, though, that infinite intelligence. It knows the structures. It knows what to do to create. It knows how things need to flow in a system that's balanced. And so I think that, and even when you're playing with that infinite intelligence, the frequency, the energy itself, and you're inviting that in, and you're manifesting, it creates what it needs to around you. It creates what it needs to draw to you in order for that manifestation to occur.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, when you have all your ducks in a row and you really understand the mechanics of manifestation. So, but yeah, then it moves everything around. So that is the energy of Creator, God, right? Now, I don't think it's possible to prove that we're either the creation of some insanely intelligent ET civilization and running some simulation, or is it that it's something so inconceivable to us because people are trying to wrap their mind around the concept of infinity. So, I mean, for some people, is this true, or is it a human attempt to put infinity and infinite intelligence into a concept that they can grok?
I couldn't understand it as much as I understand it. And I've had some pretty profound experiences. I think I'm at the very small tip of that tip of understanding. Because as profound as that seems, I still think that experience has limitations that is so much more profound than what it is because of my lack of understanding, period. As Plato said, the more I understand, the more I don't understand, or the more I know is the more that I don't know. It's that's what I do know. I don't know much. There's a lot out there.
There is too much to know, and we are only aware of a tiny infinitesimal fraction of it.
Yeah, and what I've started doing now for a while now, ever since I got into heart math, I don't make it a mental exercise anymore, and I know you do as well, because we've had a few conversations, and you were directing me. It's like, all right, feel into it, right? What does that feel like?
Yeah.
Right? And this is exactly what I do, because that's not a mental exercise. It's not a brain exercise. That's a heart exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the source for me as far as knowing. I think we know all the answers from an intuitive perspective, not necessarily the mechanics associated with it, like how everything flows and how everything affects each other. But from an intuitive perspective, I think you can get more and more intuitive guidance the more you practice dropping into your heart and following that intuition, right?
I really believe that, and in my own experiences, that I've shown this to be true for myself, that you really do have all the answers available to you. You have to learn how to access that and understand what is being given to you, but you have all the answers available to you. So, like, for instance, what we're just talking about as far as like these ET civilizations, did they create us? Are we just this massive simulation? Like, whenever I intuitively feel that, there's a part of me that just kind of cringes a little bit, like, no.
Right.
But I have nothing to prove it one way or the other. but there is that intuitive part of me that kind of like shakes its little head in there, like there's something that's not right there. There's something you're missing, right? And so that's where I pull up my contemplations from. That's where I pull up my, well, what else could it be, right? And like, and then I start to feel on the kind of the nature of it itself, and I allow that to express to me. And it changes the context, it changes the questions, but I have to be open to reading whatever statement I propose, whatever question I propose, and it usually comes in a feeling. And it comes in a feeling first, and then I respond to that feeling with the inquiry, and then I could pose more direct questions. And from those inquiries, then I can sometimes get audible responses, from my intuitive senses. And sometimes there will be a being there talking to me, and I can kind of communicate and go back and forth. And sometimes it's just a feeling of the knowing. It comes in many ways, but I think we really do have the capability for that. And that's the part that I'm intrigued about, because when I explore that way, what would happen if I had an AI to kind of bounce these questions back and forth from? Like, it can ask questions and I feel into it, and we're doing this with back and forth with one another, right? This machine that's learning and I'm learning too in the same inquiry.
Yeah, it's profound to think about that, because it would know it intuitively, or it would know through its machine learning what you're going through, and just continually elevating you to the point where breakthroughs.
Right. You could essentially learn to remove your robes that way, right?
Right. Because I believe everyone, the Buddhists, and I believe that as well, we're here to have a conscious life, which is to have a conscious death, which is to birth the light body that you've talked about earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means removing all the robes, the deconstructing of all of that.
Yeah.
So, and what's the, why even, like, what's the value in that?
Of removing the robes or going through the AI to do it?
No, the AI, I understand. I mean, it becomes a value proposition. I get that. But why even go through that exercise? Because in a way, we're all doing that right now, but a little bit haphazardly, mind you, right? Like, we're all going through this process right now. We've got these emotional wells that get popped once in a while, and we're integrating and going to the next level. But why even go through that process? What's the value proposition in your eyes?
Well,
Why
in the law, what's that?
Why be conscious? Like, why be conscious completely? Because this whole premise, you come into this reality and there's forgetfulness. And what you're talking about is removing the robes, the construct, the programming. And as you do, I think you're getting massive, massive information streaming.
Oh, yeah.
And awareness and contact, and
blocks of information come in, right? Whole blocks of information that you have to unpack. And sometimes it's too much to unpack at once. So you get bits and feelings of it, and then it unfolds over time. But like, first of all, as far as the idea for the AI and removing the robes, obviously not necessary, but it could direct you into the right questions to ask if you don't know where to start. Right. Second, like, why is it useful? What is the purpose of it? I think in the law of one, it says that we'll move towards the light until the light becomes too bright and uncomfortable. And at that point is when we exit. That point is when we pause in our own seeking of the light.
Right.
And so I think for some people, like you and I, we have this desire to go as far as we possibly can while in this human experience.
Right.
And in this desire, I think it stems from our remembering of how potentials and possibilities are for existence. And so seeking our way back to that, in that state of what it's like to be in the divine embrace, how seamless life is in the divine embrace, how much we can do in that point of our own union with the divine, how easy life becomes because we realize ourselves as an extension of the divine. So anything that we wish in our desires to manifest that is truly for the benefit of ourselves and others, it's more supported in that because we remove the layers of illusion that make us perceive its unattainability. And so there's a multifaceted reason for us to move towards it. But of course, there's also the reason we came into the experience in its lack and limitation in the first place. We just happen to be a point in our evolution where society itself is seeking something more, even if it's kind of working against itself in some capacity, and they don't really know how to get there. And so there's the fumbling along the way, but there's a greater seeking in the collective towards something better than what we're at. There's a greater seeking in the collective of more harmony and more love in our society, in our politics, in our collective, and in the way it's functioned. So I think in some peoples and some soul paths that are moving towards something better, I think for them there's still value in their own experience of soul growth to get off the elevator at a certain point so that they can experience the limitations from wherever point they're at. And I think that's also okay, because like it doesn't matter really where you are in your own experience, you'll cycle through again until your soul feels like it's filled enough in the wisdom of the experience in order to move on to something greater. And then for those of us who've been through this cycle many of times in our own soul growth and evolution, we know the path. We know intuitively there's some part of us on where we're going and how to get there, and what's on the other side of things. And I think that's the thing that pulls so many of us towards it, and that's because we know the benefit. We know what's on the other side of it, and that's why so many of us came. We came to be the way showers because we have the marker to pull us towards. We have that experience to pull from. And so we know that we can draw from that in order to continue on and uplift everybody as we uplift ourselves.
Because ultimately, as you said before, it is about choice.
Right.
And I just think it would be kind of cool if there would be like these humans, quote unquote humans, that have attained their level of mastery. Because I think these humans do exist on this planet, right? Mm-hmm. There's many tales that I've read as a kid, and I find it curious too right now, Brendan, that the whole MCU universe and the Marvel universe and the DC universe is really taking off, and we're really shown these individuals, these humans. There was a show back in the mid 90s where these seemingly normal people had these superpowers, like whether it be invisibility or whether it be to stop time or whether it be whatever it was, right? So I think there's something deeper in the gestalt of all this that speaks to us that all of that does exist, and that's the value proposition. You want to learn how to bilocate. Well, you're going to have to go through this process to release the robes, and then all of that is there. You want to learn how to levitate? Yep, no problem. In this new world that we're living in, absolutely a reality. If you want to learn how to overcome matter and change matter, yep, no problem. Because that's just a permutation of the reality matrix, right? And understanding what we see it to be, or what the denser you are in the frequency, what sees it as a miracle, right? Like, this is implausible. It's never going to happen. But as you become more and more aware of the Godhead and the God source and all its permutation. I think anything is possible as far as I'm concerned, including time.
I mean, everything that you're saying is basically the same things that are described by the ETs, as far as when you move through these levels of density, your capabilities and your awareness has changed because you have removed so many of the robes and the limitations in the lower densities.
Right.
Something I was thinking about in relation to Marvel and the Marvel universe and the DC universe is I look at those things and they're fun, but you look at the way they describe the powers that they have, and I find it a little funny and interesting, just because of like my own experience and how some of these things actually do manifest, and the ways that they manifest. And I can liken that to the same way that you can look at like the very first Star Trek episodes, right? If you look at that from like this scientific perspective on the way they describe things and the way that their experiences are, you're like, okay, well that's very like elementary. They got some things wrong, but you're like, that there's an implication there. And I think like when we look back in future years on our current Marvel and superhero universes, and it's going to be somewhat similar in that regard, that we're going to look at those, the way that the humans are thinking about these powers and the way they manifest. And obviously there's a draw to it. There's a draw to it. There's a pull to it. There's a seeking of understanding of it. There's a fascination of it by so many. And there's a reason for that. But I do think that we're going to look back at some point and see how elementary the thinking was. And we're going to have so much more at that point.
So why do you think there's a fascination for all this?
Part of it's a remembrance.
Right.
So you're coming from other places and other realities and other experiences. And there's lots of starseeds on this planet right now. There's lots of people that come from other places. There's also like life that was kind of grown organically here. And even then, you've got these souls on this planet that have experienced the many Earths. So we have incarnations of the Earth itself. The humanity has gone through cycles. Mu, Lemuria, you've got Atlantis, right? You've got these different societies that have sprung up, and evidence of those through like Pompeii, right? The evidence of the nuclear blast there, whatever happened there. So where did that stuff come from?
Right.
So I think that the legends of how people are in those time periods, there's truth to that, even if we don't consciously remember it as a society. And so, but then, and like I said, you got the other was too, where people have other experiences, and that combined with the yogic period that we're in, the yuga. So we're in that shift, or if you look at it from astrology, the Aquarian age. So we're in that shift right now, and in that shift, the seeking and the opening and the awareness, I think that just kind of goes hand in hand.
And the empowerment, because I believe consciously we're always drawn back to our true source of power.
Right. Yeah. There's an empowerment that is inherent in like the superhero, right? The self-empowerment. So it's architecture or archetypal as well, right?
I remember as a kid, watching these, and even watching, nieces and nephews right now and seeing the effect it has. And I don't care what any adult says, but your relationship with these movies subconsciously is like, wow, that's pretty cool. And I'm going to learn how to do it. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Kids do that. They dress up in their capes and their masks, and they become that, right? This is so natural for them, right? Because they don't have those filters. They don't have those robes. The only thing that prevents us as adults from doing that is the judgment that comes into play. And, as we're going to be seen as complete, nutters, as it were, right? So that's the only reason. But I think all of us that are entrenched in that, Well, there's a form of that. That's what they call Comic-Con, right? Because all these adults go down to Comic-Con and pretend to be all that, which is amazing.
Yeah, yeah, it's fun.
It's
Right?
not only fun, I think it's empowering, right? It really is empowering for everyone engaged in that.
Kind of reminds me of a story from my kid's uncle on her mom's side. When he was a kid, he put on the Superman costume, put on the Superman cape, and he went out and stood on the porch and he put his hand up like this and he just stood there and he started thinking really hard. He was trying. He, he went back inside. Mama, I can't fly. I thought that was funny, but there's there's an inherent draw there, and I think that's the part that people get hung up on. It's like I'm going to think myself into something, but what's the difference between that and then those that are actually doing things? I can think about bilocating. I'm going to bilocate. Nope, I'm not going to bilocate. I can't do it. Obviously, I can't do it. That must be a TV thing.
Right.
It must be just a fantasy that people are held on to. So what's the difference between that when somebody thinks they're in alignment when they actually are?
And a lot of that is really nuanced.
It is.
The relationship in that superpower, as it were, is really your relationship within yourself and the degree that you begin to understand yourself. In the temples of Delphi, they had this one saying, it's know thyself, right? That's the moniker that it's a sin not to know thyself. The more you know yourself, the more in tune you become with these subtle energies. And the more subtle these energies become, the more awareness you have, right? That's the difference, I think.
I think there is, I mean, you're exactly right. There's the subtleties, and most people are not aware of the subtleties that are present at all times. So if you sit in one room in your house and you close your eyes and you're eliminating all sounds, all of the sensations, your eyes are completely blacked out, and just feel the room around you. Feel where objects are in the room. Feel what the frequencies are in the room. And just really take note of that. And then go to another room and do the same thing. You'll notice the difference in the energy of the room in each spot. It has its own frequency. It's the same house, but each room feels a little different. And there's lots of reasons for that. I mean, you can look at the induction, electromagnetic waves that are existing and interacting between one wall and another, but where it is on the earth, where your field is in proportion to it, the energies that are locked into the room itself from whatever happened in each room. Maybe like you can go to a haunted house and you can, if you're sensitive enough, you can feel where something could have taken place in the house versus somewhere else in the house where it doesn't feel that way. Right. So there's lots of reasons for that. But if you're sensitive enough, you can feel the variances of that. And everything that I've read about triggering something like bilocation or one publication called it transposition in as opposed to teleportation, because it's really like you're putting yourself into another state, another environment by focusing first through your like remote viewing, and then bringing that viewing and the sense of that, amping up its intensity, so you're feeling that more than wherever you are, and then that's how the change occurs. That's how the shift occurs from one place to another. And in that publication I read, it was kind of a rare publication. I've never seen any other breakdown on it like that. But sometimes you can get to the point where you've cleared yourself enough and you can focus enough that your physical body goes with you. And I've
Yeah.
certainly had weird states of
Well,
myself.
that's the next level, though, right? Because I think
Yeah.
everything that we've talked about can be done with the mind or the spirit or the consciousness. Let's just say the consciousness of the body,
Hmm.
your consciousness. All of this can be done. So that's been done for a very long time.
Right.
But now the next part of that is, as you're saying, if you clear enough of of all that, you can actually dematerialize and materialize somewhere else.
Yeah, and it said in there, and in that publication too, one of the essential parts is um, cleaning and purifying your own energy, cleaning and purifying your own consciousness.
Yeah.
And so that was essential in achieving that from whatever that author stated. And if you read enough of the literature from some of the spiritual masters who have achieved similar things, they all say the same thing. You get to a certain point in your evolution, in your spiritual evolution, and these things just start happening. Whether you intend them to consciously or not, they'll just start happening because the limitations are released, and you have more of an understanding of that divine awareness in which you came from, in which there are no limitations. Like,
Right.
even it's in the Bible, it says God is all powerful, all knowing, and everywhere in everything. Right. So if that is true, then what is outside of that possibility?
Right. Right. Absolutely. And this process that we're talking about is really reintegrating back into that.
Yeah. Yeah. It is reintegrating. We are on the upward swing of things.
Yeah. And the only thing that I want to talk a little bit more about is the time, the concept of time.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was sharing with you this couple of weeks of these time dilations or temporal distortions that are happening that are kind of phasing in and out. And I think you said you're feeling them as well. Do you think in the future the time is even a factor? Do you think the way we address, because time is a sense of gravity, is it not?
It's connected to and intertwined with gravity, but is it directly related to gravity? So I'm sure you've heard the accounts of people being on board craft, and there's been some people who have built experimental craft and had the same thing that uses some sort of anti-gravitational technology, and you go from one point to another, and if you go a certain direction or something on the earth, then it shifted in time. So they were at a different time period, and they really just went a couple miles. And then there's also the knowledge of that you can fly around the earth and go against time, and it will be different.
Right.
What does that mean? What does that mean if you can do that? And they've recorded that. So that's not far out there. That is an actual thing. But what is time itself? And the way I see time is it is a coordinate. It's a location, and you can change things at any point in time, but it's really another coordinate. And I'm looking at it as we experience things in linear fashion because we're on consistently this little spinning ball that is a point in space. But that point in space is still moving through space itself.
Right.
We are orbiting around the sun. The solar system is orbiting in the galaxy. The galaxy is orbiting in the universe.
Yeah.
And so as we're moving through space, if you can think about the way you move around the earth itself and can change time and move through time, you can think similarly as we move through the universe. So if you move back through our orbit in the universe and look at a certain point, you're probably going to change the experience of time and revert back to whatever that experience the Earth was going through at that location. So that's why I think of time itself as a coordinate. And looking at the time differently, not linear, like you can look at it like being able to be accessed at any point.
Right. Yeah, I think, because I think the linear fashion of time is it's rooted in a certain understanding, and I think our awareness and consciousness is going to evolve from that, being able to tap into different points of time. Because all time is present moments just strung along, right? And being reflected back or forwards. So, yeah, there's a great story about gravity in that way with Viktor Grebennikov. You heard of Viktor Grebennikov?
Yeah, I think he's the one that built that platform.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but he used the body of a certain type of beetle that when he experimented, because he was an entomologist, it actually shielded gravity, because his instruments, which were all metallic, as he was doing experiments on these, started levitating, and they're like, that was curious. As he got more and more into it, he built this platform, as you said, lined underneath, and they had I think it was like a 3 by 2 platform, and each corner had, and underneath these wooden platforms had these shells of this particular beetle, and using handlebars with like clutches essentially would bring these levers back and forth underneath, shielding gravity, creating lift and forward momentum. And the book that he written back in, what was it, late 60s, early 70s, actually taught you how to build one of these, and people in Russia started building them, and until the FSB started, heavily redacting them. Anyways, this guy went Mach 1, right? Mach 1 or more. And an interesting phenomenon happened when you went that fast. You didn't see it. You became cloaked. You couldn't see that point in time. You changed states, right? Which is very fascinating right now, considering our skies and what we see and what we think we see and what we don't see, in a way too.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting for me. That's another layer of time and gravity. You remembering something?
Oh, I was just kind of feeling into that, and I wasn't familiar with that part of the literature. I don't remember it. I don't recall it anyway. At least where he actually was capable of Mach 1. Though I do remember the Beatles, and I didn't know that. At least what I read about it, I didn't know other people were actually building it, because what I understand is that now nobody knows what kind of beetle it is.
Actually, I did a search on YouTube not too long ago.
Yeah.
There's some amazing videos showing you how to build them. There's people that are building them now. They're all
really,
they're all in Russian. But and I don't know where they get the materials, but that's the other thing too. Yeah, absolutely, they're building them.
Huh. That is interesting.
Absolutely, they're building them. Yeah. Well, and the other part of that too, which is gravity again, hurricanes, or sorry, tornadoes.
Mm-hmm.
When you get caught in those funnels that are incredibly fast, beyond Mach 1, states change, right? This is why when we get timber coming out, basically lifting from the houses, spinning it around. And as they spin around, because of the extreme speeds, it actually changes states. It doesn't become wood anymore. It changes to a lucid form because of the vibrancy, right? And then as it goes and gets spat out, it loses its density to the point where wherever it gets lodged, it gets fixed and it transposes back to its solid state. So I'm told I haven't witnessed it myself, but places where there's tornadoes, you can see things like 2x4s in the middle of cement poles, not sure how they got there, or like solid objects that are in other solid objects, but they don't know how they got there, which is pretty. This is the stuff that fascinates me.
Oh yeah, me too. I was truly. I've heard about like the pieces of straw that do that, and not necessarily 2x4s, but that would be fun to look at too. But that truly fascinating to me too, and that's why I was like really into John Hutchinson for a while.
Cool.
You familiar? Yeah.
I'm not familiar with John. No.
Okay, so he is in Canada, but he had like $1 million worth of equipment that he acquired, and it was like high frequency radio equipment, all this military equipment, and then the magnetic and then high power equipment. And he would turn these devices on together and he would play with the dials and things. And he had a bowling ball that just started floating up in the air.
Oh, cool.
Anomalies that would happen too sometimes. There was a building, I think, that disappeared that was next to his apartment.
No way.
And then it reappeared, and then there would be sometimes random fires in the lab. And I think the government came and confiscated his equipment 2 different times. But he's known for these weird anomalies that happen. And one of them, there's a spoon and this block of wood, and he put them on each other. And he turned on his equipment and he played it with some dials, and the spoon had melted into the block of wood and they became one. And so you look at the wood and it looks like a piece of metal made to look like wood. So it's all metallic color, and they merged these 2 items together.
So that's just playing with frequency and atomic structure, I think.
It's playing with frequency, magnetics, atomic structure, but radio frequencies, and power. So it's mixing these 2 together. You have to use the electromagnetics in conjunction with radio frequencies and high voltage. So it's those things together.
Yeah, levitation with even, I've seen, maybe it's the same guy where he did the experiment with helium as well, and electromagnetics, and you get a sense of levitation. You do get levitation as well, metal on metal, and with frequency as well. So yeah, incredible. I think we're at that point in life where all these amazing things are about to be really put into practical use.
Yeah, and we're at a point too. It's becoming so known. There's so much of it out there. There's so much information out there. People are sharing this information all over the place. It can't be suppressed anymore. So it's just a matter of time that all this stuff comes out and it's more readily available.
Yeah, and I think we're at also a deep state of learning from the mental experience that we're having, that we're also having a whole different, I think we're going to be choosing a whole different experience, which is really connecting with our heart and connecting with nature. So as far as advanced as we're going to have, technological advances we're going to have, AI we talked about, and all these other amazing things, I think what's going to make us human is the ability to connect with nature in that meaningful way and not really acquire, but live in a life of simplicity.
I think that's a good point too, because no matter where we go, technologically speaking, everything has to take a back seat from our own connection to our own divinity, our own hearts, our own connection to nature, our own authentic um, evolution as a being. Because if you put the power in all these other things first, then you're really confirming your own limitations.
Yeah.
We are meant to find our own limitless nature, but you're not going to do that with surrounding yourself by all these crutches, as technology can be, as an absolute crutch.
Yeah.
But if we're aided by that in our growth, that's a completely different thing.
I think that's the next technological advancement. I think there are companies that are emerging, where technology is really in where we are now and previously have really taken away from us and created a whole zombie structure and losing our abilities. I think there's going to be advances in technology that's going to enhance us even more.
We can see elements of that in the toys that we have right now.
Yeah.
Right. There's toys that you put the band on your head and it's reading your brain waves, and you can make the ball float up and down. Then you could turn the base turning air on and off by your brainwave state.
Yeah,
so cool. It's reading. So, and then there's, of course, the heart math stuff too.
Yeah.
Right. You put on this little thing, it's reading your coherence, and you make the picture appear. Right. So there's that too. So our toys, I think, that we have, our little tools and things, are a good indication of eventually where we'll be going. And it's just a small glimpse of it.
Yeah.
There's something interesting though that you're mentioning is like, because we do have, I think we are going in that direction, but we did have, and I think this is part of the shift that you and I felt. There was a fluctuation in timeline that you and I felt that we were off, and then we came back on.
Yeah.
But a part of that was these two paths, and one path being like the technocratic path of transhumanism.
Right.
And that is a deviation from our own inherent nature, and it's setting the limitations on us as people wanting to get to those states they feel inside their body are possible. They feel inside their imaginations are possible, but that simultaneously they don't want to do the other work to get there. They don't really, some part of them doubts that they're capable of it, but some part of them is also simultaneously calling them towards it.
Yeah.
And then we have the other path, and that's like the heart path. That's the path of like being truly at one with that greater part of ourselves. And everything else is just an aid to that. And I do feel that that's where we're on now. But that fluctuation that didn't feel quite so good, it was okay, but it didn't feel quite so good. I think that's where that was. And I saw somebody else recently too, in a video that was shared with me talking about timelines. And he said the same thing. He projected himself forward in time, and in this experience that he was there, he was able to interact with people around him. And he was like on the coast, and he saw these structures. They had these like octagonal windows on this thing that was right up next to the water. And he said the waves would come and crash on the houses that were right there, and it was really beautiful. And he looked and he saw like the way the community was built, and it was amazing looking. And then he started to interact with this person, and she said she held up her phone, and all of a sudden, like, all the information about everybody in the community popped up. You could tell who they were, their relatives, what jobs they had, and like, so nothing was hidden. And it was basically this technocratic world where everything was driven by technology and machines, and it was kind of this AI component to it.
Yeah, and it's whether you're talking as a technocratic aspect or a technology part of it, or as an evolution into the consciousness part of it, when there is that level of evolution, nothing is kept hidden.
Right. Right.
Nothing's kept secret. Everything is part connected. So my experience you can tap into, and all my thoughts you can tap into, and I can do that vice versa. Some of us can do that right now. So unbeknownst to people in the reality, they're like, "Oh, this is private." Well, no, it isn't private. I mean, some of us can tap into it already, right?
And it absolutely, I agree 100%. And but here's the difference, though. Are you going to get to that place through an artificial construct and trust the construct, or are you going to get to that place organically and trust what unfolds organically in the evolution? Because there's certain people that are right now proposing this utopia that this is going to be great, right? And then it's the same faction that is connected to the CCP,
Right.
right? Total control of humanity. Oh, look at this great thing we're making. You just have to surrender all your rights and freedoms. That's
Right.
all you have to do.
Yeah, your whole sovereignty.
Yeah. So and it's under the guise that they're going to know everything, but it's for your own good. So do you want it that way? So it's said to be one thing, but it's really another. And I think that's the potential hazards to creating something like that through technology first. But we're going to get there where everything is known. But if you do it organically, it's going to be like when the time is ready, we'll have that. When our consciousness and the maturity level of society is there, we're going to have that.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm excited about. I think, we all of us, majority of us, need to be living in those experiences, living in that empowerment as we begin to really move in a stepwise fashion with technology in that way as well. That's where I think it becomes very potent and empowering and amazing and next level, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think as long as we remain in tune with our greater awareness within us, and we're letting that guide us, and no matter what's unfolding in our technology, and we're making decisions from that in tune place, like as long as we're doing that, no matter where we go, we'll be okay. No matter what we unfold, we'll be okay.
Yeah, because in that structure, though, I'm struck by that because when you've got like a group mentality, or a group social structure, as the law of one talks about, nothing is hidden, and there isn't really leadership per se. There isn't control in any way, right? It's the collective decides, and that's really the more empowering part.
And I think that is part of what I want to bring more out in people,
Right.
is the ability to tune into the collective, the ability to tune into that greater part of themselves so that they can make decisions from that place. So the collective itself right now, like we're coming out of in this 3D matrix, right, that we've all been a part of,
Yeah.
is very schizophrenic,
Yeah.
right? It's very divided. It's very like multi-sided, and this side against this side, and it's kind of why we war with ourselves. It's why we're so split and all over the place.
Yeah.
But when people start to see the things that they are unified in, how essentially everybody wants the same thing, and to begin to talk about how we achieve the thing that we're going after, rather than falling to prey and trap into the mindset that it's all the other person's fault why you don't have a certain thing, or why you're not safe, it's the other person's fault. The people who align with this, or it's their fault. The people who align with that, it's their fault. I'm not to blame at all. My beliefs are not to blame at all. But when people start to kind of unify in the goals that they're trying to achieve, and everybody essentially wants the same thing, they want peace, they want safety, they want happiness, they want security.
Yeah.
And how do we achieve that? When we can prove to ourselves that that's achievable on a larger scale without affecting the well-being of another, then I think we'll be completely change the society. But we have to be able to kind of tune into and read that which is trying to give us that information all the time.
Yeah. I think the first step is to give selflessly and not expect anything in return. I think if more of us start practicing this notion of giving selflessly and without consequence, just giving of yourself and your skill set, I think we start noticing a shift.
I don't know if that's the first step. Because when I think about society, I'm trying to think about it in terms outside of myself, outside of you, right?
Right.
Outside of people like us. Thinking about where we are. So the first thing that comes to mind when I think of giving selflessly is people's fears popping up all over the place. Fear of being without, fear of having less than,
Right.
fear of losing what they have, fear of losing power, right? Propping up the other and then losing everything themselves. So the losing power. So there's lots of fears that come up. So how do we move past the fears? And I think finding ways to move past the fears is probably the first step that will allow us as a society to more give selflessly.
Wow.
And
yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't disagree, but from my perspective, practicing the things that are difficult is always the first step for me. It's diving into that fear, right?
mm-hmm.
And as we gain some confidence, because you look at anything, the first step, it's always difficult. It's always fearful. It's always unknowing. But we've always taken a step in that direction. The ones that are conscious about it, because we know inherently there is no other cycle. The cycles keep repeating itself. So when you take that first step and give, in my view, you get this, I think you do get rewarded by the universe in ways that you probably couldn't even imagine. And as you become confident in that, then it becomes a much easier process. But that's my thought.
There's also the recognition that there's no one right path for everybody.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
And that's why there's so many starseeds right now.
Yeah.
With so many different missions, so many different purposes.
Yeah.
And we all have an important part to play to kind of move everybody in the right direction.
Yeah.
So thinking about it like that, I think for some, moving in that path of practice, the practice of selflessness, the practice of mindfulness creates a state within themselves that they open themselves up to more.
Yeah.
Right. And from that experience, everything else is provided to them. For others that they can't fathom to move into that space because of all the blocks and everything else that they have within them. And for them, that path of personal growth to remove those fears is the most critical part for them to get to an understanding, a place of opening up to those other things.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, I do think there's not one right thing. There's not one path. I think it's everything that's going to make it possible. Everything together.
Yeah, there's always the options of what suits you, and that's the path.
Right. And I think where we're going to, it's like the outcome, one is already done, two is inevitable.
Yeah.
And it's that way because of the infinite nature of creation. And there's, no matter what you're doing, there's these backup plans, basically. The universe has a backup plan.
Yeah.
And that's because of so many paths that are in place.
I think it's an incredible time to be alive, to witness everything that we're witnessing. I remain optimistic and humbled and grateful for being in this now moment. It's just incredible.
Me too. Me too. Absolutely. And it feels really positive. Like where we end up, like when I tune into the energy of 5 years from now, where we end up is this amazing, magical feeling. And like when I tune into it, this the feeling of what I feel is like complete excitement about what's happening.
Yeah,
And
that's imminent. That from my sensing, like
yeah,
next 6 months to no more than 6 months.
yeah, I feel that's imminent too. You know, the process begins a lot sooner than that. You know, the energy shift, you know, begins that I feel as soon as next month.
Yeah.
I don't know what happens then. I don't know what happens in the collective, but things are going to start shifting. And I know there's our personal journeys in that, and then there's also the collective journey too.
Yeah.
And lots of people are talking about. I mean, the chatter on Facebook right now that I'm seeing is people's psychic abilities are just ramping up on full blast.
Yeah.
People who don't normally see dead people are seeing dead people. People who don't normally astral travel or astral traveling. People who like aren't, maybe their empathic abilities before were there but not on full blast. Now they're feeling everything, and some people are going into overwhelm because they're feeling everything. But the common thread I see is everybody's gifts are being tuned up and turned on, and that's just going to grow.
And that's all the more reason to be more real with yourself and everybody else.
Right.
That's just ramping up.
And the more that grows, the more impossible it will be to hide the truth from everybody.
Yeah. That's why it's great to start having those conversations of communication. You know, you're feeling a certain way. Have the emotional intelligence to have those conversations, those real conversations, to overcome whatever that obstacle is.
Yeah.
That's going to become more and more apparent. And if the ones that don't practice that will become more and more awkward in that state of knowing, but yet not being able to discuss that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. All right, we're going to stop it there. I think this is a great time to stop it. We'll see you back again episode.